What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a Lord of the Rings inspired candle holder. In one of my previous videos, I showed you how I made the head of Saruman's staff. I carved out the pattern with my CNC. You don't need a CNC to carve out a pattern. You can use a hot wire cutter if you don't have access to a CNC. Now these are all the patterns after cutting them out with the machine. The next thing, I need to cut 45-degree cuts on those fins. For this, I'm using my hot wire cutter. 45 on one side and 45 on the other side. This will allow the fin to fit perfectly inside the candle holder where the two pieces meet, and I'll show you that shortly. Now for this, I'm using fast grab tacky glue. It grabs very fast, but it takes 24 hours to dry. So once you put it together, you have to let it sit for 24 hours. With the slots, you can just slide them in just like that, and they fit perfectly. Now don't forget, you are working with foam, so be very gentle, especially this foam. It's only 4.8 millimeters thick. I know it is time consuming, so the best thing is to make two at one time, not just one. After you let the glue tack up for 10 to 15 minutes, it's time to glue on the fins. I like to put glue on both sides, one on this 45 and one on the other 45. Then just attach the fin to the candle holder, just like that. Oh, and of course, you definitely want to make sure you have it on there straight. So do the next two, do the last one, very gently, push it together, and there it is. We're going to let this sit for 24 hours. Now it's been 24 hours and it's time to glue on another piece of foam, which will be used as what they call a sprue. This is where the molten metal will flow downward into the pattern. Press that on firmly and let that sit for another 24 hours. Yes, I know, one more thing I have to do. Now we need to coat it with joint compound. I watered this down so it has a thin consistency. You can see here it's not your normal joint compound. It's pretty thin. You don't want it too runny, because if it was too runny, it would never stick to the foam and just completely run off. You want to apply this to the foam until it's completely covered. You try to get into every little piece that you can. Now the reason you coat the foam with the wall plaster is because it keeps the surface finish of the foam. Without it, you'll get a really grainy finish because of the sand. The molten aluminum will seep into the sand and you'll get a really hard, grainy candle holder, and that's not what we want. So when that's done, just let it sit for another 24 hours to dry. Now it's time to turn this piece of foam into solid aluminum. To do that, I'm going to use a process called the lost foam casting method. I don't really know why they call it lost foam casting, but I do know that the foam will then be turned into solid aluminum when I'm finished. It's a very simple method. All you have to do is take a piece of foam, put it in a canister, fill it with dry sand all the way to the top, and of course, put pouring basins over top. This is where the molten metal would be poured into, so it's contained and not spilled all over the place. For the first cast, I'll use my electric furnace to melt down the metal. When the metal is molten and hot enough, it is then time to pour it into the mold. Because I only put enough metal in there for one, I'm now going to heat up more metal for the next pour. And while I wait for that to melt down, I'm just going to try to remove the cup off of this one to reuse it in the future. every cast doesn't work out the way you want it to. So now it's another day and I want to make more. So I'm going to use my Castmaster GG5000 propane furnace. I'm using a 4 kg crucible, and you always want to put cardboard in between the plinth and the crucible. That way when you remove the crucible, it does not stick to the plinth. For the aluminum, I'm just going to use aluminum cutoffs from other lost foam castings that I've done. When you need to add more aluminum to the crucible, always preheat the aluminum before adding it to molten metal. Always preheat your crucible tongues as well. You don't want to touch a hot crucible with cold tools. This time I'm going to check the temperature of the molten metal, because I think that's what happened with the failure on my last cast. Even though the metal was molten in that last cast, it wasn't hot enough to pour. Before you pour, you always want to remove any of the slag that floats to the top of the molten metal. Now this is where the magic happens. You pour the aluminum into the pouring cup and it just vaporizes the foam and takes its shape. It's quite fascinating actually. That's why lost foam casting is one of the easiest ways to cast metal. Anything you can make out of foam, you can turn into solid aluminum. I hope you like watching liquid metal being poured, because I didn't do 2 more. I actually did 4 more.